My daughter-in-law threw my toolbox into the mud. 19 days later, I call the note due. 40 years of showing up with tools in my hands for every single thing this family ever needed. And all it took to get thrown off that porch was one spring cleaning morning and a woman who wanted better photographs for her listings. My name is Walter Prescott, and for 34 years I made precision tooling at Erie Forge and steel up on the east side until my knees gave out before my hands ever did. I am 63 years old. I wore the same green flannel in October that I wore in 1994. If you saw me buying scratch tickets at the Sunoco on 12th Street, you'd peg me for a man who forgets where he parked, not a man who used to sign off on tolerances tighter than a hair. That suits me fine. I'm a patient man. I have always been a patient man. My father used to say some men win the fight in the first punch, and some men win it 3 years later and never raised their voice once, and I took after him. I do not panic. Slow is scarier than loud, and I've known that since I was younger than my son is now. Carol is my wife, 40 years married this past March, and she still makes fun of me for keeping receipts from 2003. She taught second grade in Mill Creek for 31 years, and she can silence a room of 8-year-olds with one raised eyebrow, a skill she has never stopped using on me. My son Dale is 37. He's a good man underneath everything, an HVAC tech with steady hands, and I love him the way you love someone whose choices you cannot always follow anymore. 3 years ago, in April of 2023, Dale and his wife Kristen wanted to build an addition onto their house on Poplar Street, a proper in-law suite with its own entrance, so that Carol and I would have somewhere to land when the day came we couldn't manage the house on West 6th Street anymore. Kristen sells real estate for a firm downtown, and she is good at it, sharp about staging and light and curb appeal in a way I will never understand. I want to be fair to her. She grew up with less than most of the family she now sells houses to, and she has worked hard for every commission she's ever earned. 2 winters ago, when my knees first started going, she was the one who drove 40 minutes each way to a medical supply store in Meadville to find me a recliner with the right lumbar support. She would not let me pay her back for it. Not a dollar. Not even when I tried 3 separate times. But there is a difference between working hard and treating people like line items. And somewhere along the way, Kristen started doing the second thing more than the first. The bank wanted 7.5% for a home equity loan. I offered $46,000 of my own retirement savings at 2% instead, and I had it done right. My old friend from shop floor, Ray Delroy, had gone into banking compliance after Erie Forge closed the tool room, and he walked me through it plain. Ray, we are not doing a handshake. We are doing a promissory note. We are recording a lien, and you're putting in writing exactly what happens if things go sideways. I wrote one clause myself, in my own plain language, that the full balance would come due immediately on written demand if the terms of our agreement were ever violated. Deborah Kessler, the lawyer who notarized it, told me most fathers never think to protect themselves that carefully. The insult came on a Saturday 3 weeks ago, during what Kristen called her spring cleaning. I had left my father's toolbox on the back steps of the addition, the steel one with the rust spots and the dent from 1978, because I'd been out there fixing the hinge on their storm door. I came around the side of the house to get it, and found Kristen standing over it with her landscaper, a young guy named Curtis who does the lawn crews for half the street. She looked at the toolbox, looked at me, and did not lower her voice at all. Kristen, we really do not need this cluttering up the porch, and pushed it off the top step with the toe of her sandal. It landed in the mud by the downspout, and the lid popped open. Dale was 15 feet away, raking leaves into a tarp. He did not stop raking. That was somehow so much worse than screaming would have been. I was not angry. I was done. Angry people make noise. Done people make moves. By the time I had that toolbox wiped down in back of my truck bed, I already knew exactly which drawer at home held the folder with Deborah's number in it. I did not say a word to Kristen that afternoon. I loaded the toolbox in my truck bed, and on the drive home I called Ray, not because I suspected anything specific yet, only because getting pushed off a porch makes a man want to know his paperwork is airtight. Walter, just checking my flank. Make sure that lien is still exactly where I left it 3 years ago. Ray called back 2 days later, and he did not sound like a man with good news. "Ray, there's an appraisal order logged against that property, dated 3 weeks back, tied to a different lender than the one on your note. Nothing wrong with a homeowner ordering their own appraisal, except normally somebody tells the existing lien holder before it happens. Nobody told you." I drove to the county recorder's office myself the next morning. First time I'd set foot in that building in maybe 15 years. Stood in line behind two guys arguing about a fence line and pulled the file. There it was in black and white, a cash-out refinance application. In the property description the appraiser had filled out, the addition was listed as a guest suite, non-conforming accessory structure, not the in-law suite with occupancy rights we had written into the original agreement. The exact words Kristen had already started using with the neighbors. I called Carol from the truck before I'd even started the engine. She went quiet for a long moment while I read her the description word for word, standing there in the parking lot with the diesel trucks idling past me. Then she said one word. "Carol, read it again." I brought a copy of the file to Deborah that same afternoon. The lien was recorded properly. My name's still on it, and no refinance could clear title without my signed release, appraisal or not. Deborah, tapping the folder on her desk. "What you have is a fully enforceable right to call this note due today if you want to. Walter, what I want is for my son to still speak to me in a year." So I waited. 19 days, to be exact. I kept showing up to Sunday dinners like nothing had happened. I coached Dale's rec league softball team on Tuesday nights, same as always. I mowed my own lawn, fixed my own gutters, and said nothing about the copy of that recorder's file sitting in my glove compartment. Kristen, for her part, grew bolder. She started telling neighbors the addition was almost ready to list on a short-term rental site. One Sunday she mentioned, almost cheerfully, that the guest suite photos were coming out beautifully. Carol had to excuse herself to the kitchen twice that dinner just to breathe. Dale's 40th birthday landed on the 19th day. Kristen had planned it at Como's on State Street, the whole family there, candles already lit when I stood up with the file under my arm. "Walter, Kristen, before we cut that cake, I want to say something, and I want to say it once." She smiled at first, the way you smile when you think a toast is coming. "Walter, 3 years ago, I gave you and Dale $46,000 at 2% interest, so my wife and I would have somewhere to live out our last years near our son. I have not asked you for a dollar of it back since. I said nothing when the addition sat unfinished for 8 months longer than promised. I said nothing when you called that suite a guest room to your open house clients instead of what it was built to be. 3 weeks ago, you told me, in front of a stranger, that we really do not need this cluttering up the porch, while my father's toolbox out in the mud by your downspout." Kristen's face had gone very still. She started to say something about the market, about how rentals just made more financial sense right now, about how nobody had ever told her the suite was permanently off the table for listing. I did not raise my voice. I only had one more fact left to give her. "Walter, the lien is still in my name, and under the terms I wrote myself, I am calling the full $46,000 due, in writing, as of tonight, unless that suite is finished as agreed and my wife's name goes on the deed alongside ours as intended." A water glass tipped over near the far end of the table, and nobody moved to catch it. Dale's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Carol's cousin, Denise, put her hand flat over her mouth and left it there. Kristen opened her mouth once more, and nothing came out. "Kristen, quiet now. You could have talked to me." "Walter, I did talk to you. Once in your driveway, in the mud, 3 weeks ago. You just weren't listening yet." I sat back down and ate my cake. Deborah filed the formal demand letter that Monday, purely as leverage, never meaning to collect. Within 2 weeks, Kristen withdrew the outside refinance entirely. The addition was finished properly by August, the original in-law entrance restored, and Carol and I were added to a deed rider, giving us lifetime right of occupancy. Every clause written out this time. Kristen never lost her license or her marriage, and I never wanted her to. She lost the ability to pretend the money came with no strings attached, and that was always the only thing I was after. Dale and I had one long, uncomfortable talk on his back steps about why he stays quiet when it matters, and he's still working on that. Financially, Nothing of mine ever left my account. My credit, my note, my $46,000. Exactly where I left it, sitting there like a promise nobody gets to quietly erase. We drove home from Como's that night with the windows down, even though it was only 60 degrees, because Carol likes the smell of the lake in September, no matter what the thermometer says. She reached over at the light on 12th Street and turned the radio down. Carol, you didn't even raise your voice. Walter, 40 years of tolerance is tighter than a hair. You learn not to. She laughed. The real one. The one that still gets me every time after 4 decades. Carol, that toolbox is going back on the porch shelf tomorrow. Bolt it down this time. Walter, bolt it down. Some things you only have to lose once. We stopped for gas on the way home, and I let the tank fill slower than it needed to, standing there in the cold with my wife laughing at something on her phone. I thought about my own father, who never once raised his voice and still got everything he wanted from people eventually, on his own patient terms. 40 years of showing up with tools in my hands for this family. And it turned out the only tool I ever really needed was one Ray taught me to write into a contract 3 years before anybody threw a single thing into the mud.